We have a great panel here to give you some reflection on the last two talks, to talk with you about the question more broadly, and to answer your questions today. Our first panel member here is Xingli Chen, the president of the GE China Technology Center, who we introduced already this morning. Also here with us is Neil Hawkins. He's the Vice President of Sustainability, Environment, Health, and Safety for the Dow Chemical Company. It's great to see you here this morning. In addition, we have Ma Jun. He's the founding director of the Institute for Public Environmental Affairs, based out of Beijing, China. Dennis Osanis. Dennis is a professor of engineering here at the University of Michigan. Also is the director of our Energy Institute. Also is, from the point of view of this conference, very importantly, is the lead for the clean vehicles part of the Clean Energy Research Centers, which David Sandalo was talking about in the first talk. Also, we have Professor Jerry Fletcher from the University of West Virginia. He is actually the lead, U.S. lead of the coal-based Clean Energy Research Center, which is also brought up this morning in the Secretary's talk. So those are our set of folks we have here this morning. Dennis, if you can just give us a comment or two, we'll go to Dennis and Jerry to have them give us a comment or two about the CERCs, and then we'll start to collect up your questions and move forward with thoughts that you have. And if our other panelists have thoughts from the session this morning that really struck them, please just let me know, and we'll get to you right away as well. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for all of us to be with you today. Jerry and I, as you just heard, lead two of the three arms of the Clean Energy Research Center that has been established between the U.S. and China. The vehicles part and the coal part. We also have a building part. Mark Levin is in China right now, evidence of the collaboration that is taking place between U.S. and China. So clearly, these are very important areas towards our quest for sustainability. In particular, in the area of vehicles, China has already overtaken the U.S. in terms of production of vehicles with 18 million, as you've seen from David Sandalo, versus 11 million we produced in the U.S. last year. So the growth is going to be phenomenal in the next several years. In the U.S., every 100 people, 80 have vehicles. In China, it's maybe 10. So you can imagine what's going to happen in the future. Now, as we look towards that future, there are certain investments that need to be made in terms of clean energy technologies for vehicles in particular, which are massive in scale. There are way too many options that we need to investigate to make transportation more sustainable. And clearly, it is very advantageous for the two countries, the two nations, to work together. Both are very dependent on petroleum. They're importing over 50% in terms of petroleum. The transportation is almost entirely dependent on petroleum. So both nations have a very strong initiative towards the electrification of transportation. So we're working together, the US and Chinese researchers from a number of universities, from industries, as well as national labs, in a number of thrusts related to these electrified vehicles, hybrid vehicles, as well as vehicles with improved combustion engines in synergy with the hybrid drive and electrification. Batteries is a huge challenge that the two nations can work together. We need order of magnitude improvement from where we are now, lightweight materials, and advanced biofuels. So that gives you a sense of the scope.
Thanks, Dennis. So as I think a lot of people in the audience know, China and the U.S. have a great portion of the world's coal. So based on what we saw in terms of the projections this morning, Jerry, what is the CERC's aim here?
Well, yes, and I also appreciate the opportunity to be here. The coal sector in the world is clearly one that has a love-hate relationship with many of the organizations that we deal with. And yet, it is absolutely critical and essential at this point in time to provide the baseload power for both of the countries. We, at this point in time, have no alternative. My personal approach to some of this is that coal is, and fossil fuels in general are, a bridge to the future. They're not the long-term goal that we as a society aim for. There are many other opportunities that we hope are more sustainable. We understand that this is a limited resource. However, it is one that has built us to where we are today. It is what has allowed the industrial revolutions that we have seen over time. It is still the main power in both of the U.S. and China for when you plug in your toaster in the morning, or perhaps when you plug in your car in the future. A good share of that power is going to come from coal for some time. I think the big challenge is as to how do we minimize the footprint of utilization of those resources. That includes energy efficiency. How do we get the most out of what we use? And two, how do we minimize the footprint, both the traditional environmental footprint, the water issues that go along with it, but more importantly, in recent years, our understanding of what's going on with carbon management and the potential impacts of the increase in carbon in the atmosphere to the long-term viability and sustainability of the ecosystem as we know it. I try and stay out of the climate change debate because for some people that just turns off the conversation. One of the things that I will say is no matter what your opinion is on the actual outcome of the climate change debate, there is clearly a high risk factor associated with the potential for climate change under virtually any scenario. So one of the things that I've been trying to say is we spend a lot of money on insurance. We spend a lot of money on a lot of things because of uncertainty. I think we have to justify the ability to deal with the carbon footprint of coal and other fossil energy in the same way. And it's something that the CERC is going to be concentrating on. If you look at our work with China in the clean coal, the original call came for clean coal, including carbon capture and storage. And if you look at it from the Chinese perspective, the emphasis was on the clean coal aspects. They are very interested in getting their efficiency up. They are very interested in making sure they meet with traditional environmental issues as well. In the U.S., it was much more aimed at the CCS. We are a more mature economy in terms of the way we have used coal, but we realize half of the generating capacity in China is less than 5 years old. That the Chinese energy, coal energy sector is more efficient than the U.S. energy sector in coal utilization. So there's a great deal for both of the countries to learn. There's a lot of reasons for us to collaborate, and that's what we hope to do over the next few years.
Thanks, Jerry. Was there a comment? No? Okay. Well, as Vice President Forrest mentioned this morning, there's a big role for the companies in terms of developing and producing the things we need to address our sustainability challenges. And that leads into the first question from the audience, which cuts right to one of the really hard parts of this whole problem. So I'll read it out to you. It says, what are the strategies for the collaborative development of new technologies between Chinese and U.S. research institutions, especially when you consider protecting intellectual property rights? And I know that both Jerry and Dennis have been working on this immensely from the point of view of the CERC, and I have no doubt that our corporate participants on the panel worry about this every day as well. So I think we have a lot of potential feedback on this question. So I'm curious to hear the answers myself.
Let me start because I fly to Wuhan on Sunday for a day-long, two-day meeting on the whole idea of technology management plans and IP between the U.S. and China. That has been one of the sticking points in getting what we're doing with China started, is to make sure that we understand intellectual property, that we know how we're going to manage it. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to get our corporate partners to go with us. And even the universities and the national labs have similar issues. What I think is happening is that is a rapidly evolving issue in China itself. As more and more of the intellectual property being developed in the world is coming from China. And so the way that I think China is looking at it is changing. But it is certainly something that is a major challenge, and hopefully in the next few months, or hopefully in the next few weeks, we will actually have a tentative plan that is agreed to between our two countries, at least as far as what we're doing in the CERC.
Well, certainly intellectual property is always a big issue, and for Dow Chemical, we're a science and technology company largely driven off of R&D and innovation, so it's a very big issue for us. It's an issue even between companies and universities. I mean, we have that that we deal with all the time together. The one thing I would say, though, is for China, it's really grown for us to be one of our key research organizations in the world. We're now at over 3,000 employees. Probably half of those are PhD level researchers, and so we're going head first into this whole issue of doing research in China and working to make sure we have the intellectual property safeguards that we need to practice those technologies and gain the value for them. But China is so important in terms of growth, but also in terms of the students. The intellectual capital of China is critical, and being there and actually doing research there is very important for solving these challenges, but also for finding solutions for the rest of the world as well.
So I just going to add that for us in the vehicle space also, the intellectual property management and technology management is very important. But I believe we've made great strides. In our consortium, we have a number of universities in the U.S. as well as a number of national labs and industry partners, and the same is true in China. So we have very carefully selected the space where we perform the work to be what I would refer to as pre-competitive. So in that area, we can learn a lot by actually working together, de-risk some of these technologies that are out there and they're extremely expensive to research alone. There are way too many combinations. Just think, for instance, of battery space. Today, we're looking into lithium ion batteries, but tomorrow there might be lithium sulfur batteries, and maybe the day after tomorrow in 20 years might be lithium air batteries. And so in the CERC, we are looking at some ways to explore lithium air batteries, lithium sulfur batteries. In fact, we've segmented the work so that the Chinese work on one of those, the lithium sulfur chemistries, and we work on the lithium air, and we exchange. And all of that is going to be 15 and 10 years out. So I think we both stand to gain and develop good products. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a good strategy.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit different perspective. The industrial research in China is a new phenomenon. I mean, there's not many corporations that does research. So the concept of pre-competitive collaboration is new as well. So I think those of us here in the U.S. are very familiar with government-sponsored programs where industry universities get together, even competitors at the same table for pre-competitive research. I think we need to do that in China too. The good thing is the government is listening. I mean, the 10 years I've been in China, I've always been asking government, when are you going to open the big government programs to multinationals operating in China? I mean, if you think about it, we are a registered Chinese company. The R&D Center is a registered Chinese company, but although it's not written black and white, well, none of us are included in those programs. And as Dow and GE, those companies have huge operations. I happen to be the chairman of the foreign invested company R&D centers in Shanghai. Shanghai alone has last year 55% of industrial R&D spending were from foreign invested companies, right? So it's a big part of the ecosystem of innovation in China already. Good thing is I just received the invitation a couple of days ago from Ministry of Science and Technology. The Vice Minister Cao Jianing is holding a meeting second week of June, and he invited me and a few other multinational folks to talk about this, right? And how can we actually be more open about collaboration, especially huge investment from the government going forward. How do we actually become part of that and then share with each other, right? This is incidentally not the first time either, because 2 years ago I actually initiated one of the meetings with the Ministry of Science and Technology. But you know, we hear each other, and then the response is we can't do anything because the policy is in place or unspoken rules are in place, right? But I think things are started to change, and I think the realization that 1 + 1 is greater than 2 certainly will be better going forward. But again, IP is always on everybody's mind, but pre-competitively, I think we can do a lot more.
Thank you. Here's another question out of the audience. It's one of, again, a fairly difficult question. It is, how does one achieve global sustainability and have government, academics, industry all participating in this when you have a moving target? In other words, the living styles of the people in the countries are changing and dynamic. By the way, we'll have some talks about that tomorrow morning. The industrial sector wants to profit, and all of this has substantial environmental impact. How do we have wins across all of these things?
Yeah, I appreciate this tough question. I think throw it upon me, and I think it's hugely important for us to. I think this morning some data have been laid out, and we realized that it's totally not sustainable if China and India trying to join the rich man's club and just try to copy the American way of living. And I think it's our Earth cannot sustain that. So based on this understanding, I think it is important for all the major stakeholders, the government, the business, and the people, the public, to try to do something to do with that. I think one of the major areas should be the how to promote not just sustainable manufacturing but sustainable living. You know, driven by the consumers who eventually, you know, they will want green products, want to buy those products. How do we generate that? I think it is quite important for us to provide to make sure that they will be informed. We need to inform the consumers and give them the right choice. At this moment, the business, they would love to talk about their green products, their green strategy. But in the meantime, people are worried about greenwash. So we need the companies to come up with a full disclosure of their data. You know, the performance of their environmental performance of their products, and also as well as the discharge data. You know, during the not just the manufacturing, but the whole life cycle, the whole value chain, from sourcing of raw materials to their operation to the manufacturing, and all the way down to disposal. This whole life cycle process, we need them to provide those data, and for the government, I think it's also important for the government to make disclosure, transparency about the enforcement data. They generate good rules and standards, but also, you know, make sure that the enforcement will be disclosed, it will be transparent. So we understand, you know, whether those companies are sticking to the rules. Not just that, beyond that, we understand whether they are, you know, continuously try to improve themselves. And with this, I think the academia and the NGOs can do a lot of work, can make a contribution by providing unbiased and science-based data. And that's what we as an NGO are trying to do. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk more about that.
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot of discouragement on the public policy side, in global public policy and in U.S. policy. because there have been a lot of failures in the last 2 years to make progress addressing global sustainability policy. And then we have Rio 2012, Rio Plus 20 next year coming up. So this is not the best time in terms of policy discussions, et cetera. But in China, I think it's very different. China has very clear policy directions. Not everybody may agree with everything in the policy directions, but there is very clear policy on how China is going to move forward towards sustainability. I think whoever asked the question about the moving target asks a very important question, and it forces us to go up to a 50,000-foot view and really think about the fact, as was mentioned this morning and as Ma just mentioned too, I mean, we're headed towards 10 billion people on the planet, and we've really got to look at the food, energy, and water nexus, that system of food, energy, and water, and really be thoughtful about how we as a set of countries are dealing with the growth in population. Because that population growth is going to erode the ecosystems, it'll erode the ability, it'll out-tax the ability of us to produce food, all of which leads to also more energy consumption and water desecration. So this is it's a challenging situation because of the growth of the population on the planet. But I think that's a very important place where academia can take a lead, is really tying together the systems thinking necessary so that we have frameworks so we can begin to solve the problems. I think the technology side is very important, but we also need to be bringing a policy framework that allows us to have a chance at solving these challenges.
So I agree 100% with the need for systems thinking and policy. I will add that to basically break this impossible constraint equation, you know, and lead to some new solutions, we will also need innovation. And in some of these innovative solutions, things can come from academia and national labs and the R&Ds in industries. New products can be developed, and these, of course, would be good for industry. So these green industries can profit, at the same time come up with sustainable solutions for the planet. For instance, the example I was given this morning with the wastewater treatment, the sludge and all of that, you know, clearly some new solutions are needed. I mean, think for these highly urbanized environments, tall buildings where you have 60 stories or 100 stories and so many people living together. And there's a lot of solid waste and a lot of liquid waste. If we can process it and have new innovations, I think we can have a very good solutions for recovery of that waste and conversion to energy and efficient utilization.
Great, thanks. There's another question for our audience that transitions pretty nicely here. You've touched on some of it just a moment ago, but the questioner asks, how can you build environmental protection in at the beginning stages during all this technology development and growth that we're talking about? How do you make it part of the process more so than it's been in the past?
Maybe I'll start by answering that. As I mentioned earlier, the eco-imagination drive from GE perspective is really to do that. Because every product we make, you really have to think about energy efficiency and the impact, emissions or whatever. So I think a lot of that is driven by regulations, right? To be honest, there's government regulations that we all have to follow. But I think also from a competitive standpoint, that's your competitive edge too, right? So I think we just have to be, and we have been more conscious about sustainable operations of all our, whatever we develop, right, in technology or in product and solutions. And to echo Dennis' earlier words, I mean, we say green is green. And if you're green, you actually can make profit too. And that's proven in the last 7 years, I think, since we launched this Eco-Imagination initiative because we go through a very rigorous process of certifying what is an eco product from GE. And so the past 7 years has proven that you can actually do both. You can actually develop energy efficient products and also make money at the same time.
Yeah, we at Dow, we've through our sustainability programs and through our sustainable chemistry programs, have built sustainable chemistry screens into all of our allocation processes for research, and we're evaluating all our investments from that point of view. So I think the key point, if you're a private sector actor in this space, is to build it back into your processes so that you can't check everything all the time. You need to build a culture where your researchers and engineers are making better choices and the right choices wherever they happen to sit in the organization. So we spend a lot of time on that. Likewise, though, I think on the governmental side, where policies are put forward, they drive enormous change in the private sector as well as government sectors and other sectors. And I think we need to be carefully looking at the life cycle impacts of recommended policy changes before those get implemented. And you can think of a number of examples, at least here in the USA, that we probably wouldn't have done if we were thoughtfully addressing policy.
Yeah, I think the government could do a lot more. I mean, so far in China, we have rules and standards copied from the Western countries, but the enforcement remains to be really weak on that. So those companies, GE and Dow, I think they are, very special, big multinational companies operating in China, and they focus a lot of attention on this. But our own local companies, they still, very much stuck at this status quo. They know business as usual, that's what they're thinking about. They haven't felt the pressure from the enforcement side and also from the incentive side. I mean, the cost, the price of raw materials, such as coal and other, and water, remains to be very much undervalued, underpriced in China. So I think those hasn't provide we need to change that to provide the pressure and also the incentives for the companies to start thinking about this issues at the beginning of the development of those technologies.
Let me just say one thing. I mean, I've spent a good share of my career dealing with the policy issues as an economist. But I think that one of the things that is the weakest part of this is the technology. Is it not on?
It's on.
Coming on? Can you hear me?
I think it might have a little battery here. We'll trade.
All right. Gee, run out batteries already.
Yeah. Need battery technology.
You got work to do. Yeah. I think the issue that we have is oftentimes we're way ahead in technology in terms of where we are in policy and regulation. That what we need to do in policy, from my perspective, is if you provide the right incentives and if you provide the right constraints to the things that really do not have to the private sector, and then get out of their way and let them do their thing, that I've never seen anything that a private sector wants to do where the incentives won't make it better. But policy is extremely difficult, and trying to bring that together on an international basis is a huge challenge. And I actually think that's one of the bigger challenges we face today. The technology, we got the people that can do that. We're training the people to do that. We find it much harder to get the right people into the policy realm and to understand what's going on there.
All right, since Jerry's moved this to policy, we have a policy question, which is, in China, there's major efforts in terms of making large planned communities, whole planned cities are going into place. That's also happened in the U.S. And can you compare and contrast the planned cities efforts in the U.S., particularly with respect to how the national and local governments have effectively planned sustainability into their city planning?
Well, I guess I'm coming from a strange state to talk about planning. West Virginia is not a state that is known for doing much of that. And I've lived in California where you have a very different approach to life. So I think in the U.S. we've had very mixed results in terms of our long-term planning. I think China has more of a culture and a history of more centrally planned activities. We'll see how well they turn out. I think that, again, it's one thing that it's important as you take those activities on to allow people to be innovative and figure out the best way to actually gain some of those final objectives. And so that trade-off between social and cultural goals and the best way to accomplish them are often by different people. And bringing that nexus together is an extremely difficult thing to do.
I would just say that it poses a remarkable opportunity in China. It's much tougher in the U.S. to plan thoughtfully interventions, on a whole urban scale. I mean, just here in Detroit area, I mean, that is a remarkable opportunity, and we just can't seem to get the traction. But you look at how fast China overtook the world in renewable energy. When they decide to make change happen, it happens quick. And so, as was pointed out by Mr. Sandalo earlier, this changeover in building stock and the construction that will happen is an unbelievable opportunity for China to leapfrog. Dow is quite active in advanced insulation materials and green buildings and that sort of thing. The right choices there could really make a big impact in, one, improving the housing stock, but two, really getting more energy efficient. And I think systematically going across all of these different areas can make a big difference. We need to do the same thing in the U.S. It's just a challenging policy environment to get that kind of thing to happen right now.
Yeah, I think you're letting the U.S. off a little too easy there, guys, because Columbia, Maryland, Sun City West, these are major planned communities, actually, large, huge planned communities. And how does our sustainability planning compare for, say, a Sun City West as compared to some of the new cities that are being designed in China?
I'm not familiar with the U.S. cases, but in China, we engaged in discussions with cities who are developing new zones, and I think they are very serious. I think the challenges, though, is the cost at this point, because they get measured on. They basically were given budget from different governments to develop, and so the current technology, I think, current solutions either cannot meet all the requirements or they cost too much. So it's always, boiled down to how much can you afford. And another thing that actually I think that is negative in this area is the way the planners in China think. They put a lot of emphasis on the CAPEX versus OPEX, right? So sometimes you have to invest double, and then you get a return in 5 years of operation. And they don't look at it that way because they got budget this year, and they don't really look long term, right? So there are a lot of things needs to change, and that's why I think the demonstrations are important. So demonstrations are commitment from both solution providers and governments, where you say, okay, the next 10 projects not going to make money, but we're still going to do it because long term it will make money and change the way people plan and construct or build communities. So that's a commitment I think a lot of corporations are willing to do. But from government side, some of them do now, but there's still several aspects, right? That, as I mentioned, needs to work out and come to an agreement in practical terms.
There's a whole room full of students here who are very active in developing entrepreneurial skills and are ready to run out into the world and change it.
Yeah,
So what are your recommendations for them? What are your recommend? So they're actually asking you about startup opportunities as well. They're interested in the ways that they can come participate, both I'm sure with the big companies, but also in starting up completely new ventures.
Yeah, that is actually a growing area. You know, reluctant as I would like to see, there are GE folks going out to join startups or start up themselves in China. But I think it's the right thing to do as well. I mean, you need new ideas, you need innovation. But I think for many of the challenges we face, startups are probably going to provide unique technology instead of total solutions. So it's a good thing that many of them are getting into, high-tech and low-cost solution on a point basis. But then to make it really together and integrated, I think it will require a lot more and bigger corporations and organizations together. But I like what I see in China. All the startups, and we actually invested in them too. From the company perspective, we have an arm of the operation that actually actively invests in startups.
Neil?
Yeah, he sort of kiddingly said join GE or join Dell, but there's a lot of truth to that, and I know looking at his company, my company, and other, especially technology-driven companies, there's a very strong entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial culture growing to take ideas that you might think of as needing to go through venture capital, outside of a corporate system and bring them to life. And I think there can be real advantages in both. Large companies like ours have the resources to support new ventures, be it in battery technology, solar, water, which we do. And so we have a combination of large company effort, but also a lot of work with smaller firms. I think the other thing I would say is when you're, and these are all the students here, when you're at the university, and we do a lot of this here at University of Michigan, try to work on an interdisciplinary basis. Because let's say you're engineers or chemists or what have you, working with the business school, with the public policy school, the public health school, whatever, sustainability really crosses many disciplines. And so while you have that chance at university to broaden the viewpoints, I think it's an important crucible to actually finding bigger and better solutions. You'll still be that engineer or chemist or scientist, but I think broadening your view of the challenges we're trying to solve at the food, water, energy nexus, the best place to do that's at university.
So we view at the University of Michigan innovation and entrepreneurship coupled completely, and I believe the future for the young students in this area is very bright. In the College of Engineering, we have a Center for Entrepreneurship, for instance, which is teaching classes and bringing a lot of those successful entrepreneurs out to the campus every week, and we have 300 and 400 students who attend their lectures. Also, in the area of clean energy technologies, the University of Michigan is probably now among the top 5 in the U.S. and, for that matter, the world. Not only we are doing very well within the U.S., but one of my former students, who is Chinese, ended up going to China, back to China, and started his own company focusing on electric motors, and now he's in the second round of venture capital, some of it which has been attracted from the U.S. So you can see the global connected world.
I guess the one thing I would say to students that are thinking about entrepreneurship is to make sure that the interdisciplinary thing is key. Make sure that you at least learn enough about the other disciplines and the other questions, you know when to go get help and when to get answers. What I've seen most, and we teach entrepreneurship as well, I think that's pretty much going around most of the universities. But it's amazing what we see young students, their ability to conceptualize problems. We've been doing it in entrepreneurship teams, where we try to bring people from different disciplines together to work together, and that's been very successful. And a number of them have started businesses right out of university. They're going out and starting as young people. Many of them, others, go into the companies and come out later. But it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's a trade-off, and you have to understand it. You have to be ready to do the risk and 23-hour days and an hour sleep.
There's a question about the challenges associated with the grids in the two countries, and how do you match up the grids to electric vehicles? And if not that, is there another solution to the emissions problems out of all the vehicles besides the grids and the electric vehicles?
So, first of all, I don't believe there's one unique solution, and we have a panel in the afternoon. We'll talk more about it. There's no silver bullet. We are going to need to electrify the transportation, obviously, to have another source of energy on board the vehicle, but we're not going to go there in one stroke. And obviously, the grids need to get smarter in their management. The other thing that needs to happen is the generation of electricity needs to be from renewables, and when you do that, or increasingly from renewables and low carbon sources, and when you do that, it brings along a need for storage. So we really have to attack the energy storage problem. We need batteries at the grid level, we need batteries at the level of the vehicles, and that is a huge challenge ahead. It's kind of the same as putting a man on the moon. And so we have our work cut out.
And in the U.S., I think that we have been studying the technology for a while, but the ability to actually implement that in public policy in terms of getting rights of ways to move lines and being the ability to actually build that infrastructure is facing tremendous challenges. And so again, we're back into that policy space, where how do we actually bring those questions and how do we bring them into a public forum in a way that we can make those trade-offs? Because the NIMBY principle lives. You know, the not in my backyard, and there's a few others that are even a little stronger in terms of those acronyms that we hear today. So I think that we have to make sure that we bring the social and the political and the policy realm along with our technology. And that's going to be a challenge that we will continue to face.
All right, and then this is the last question before lunch here. I know we have lots of other questions. I've been trying to synthesize across them as fast as I can here. But people will be here to talk to during lunch, et cetera. We've got a whole slew of questions up here that are all basically concerned with the greenhouse gas emission problem. Yeah, Jerry's favorite question. So the questions kind of go like this. Wow, China's greenhouse gas emissions are going up really, really fast, and that's a concern. There is the question about whether one uses policy or markets to fix this problem. And then there's the concern of, Jerry, can coal ever be a green technology?
That's the wrong color. Let me just say that I don't think that fossil fuels in general will ever be considered green technologies. I think that I still think of fossil fuels are necessary to help us get where we want to be, but we have to figure out how to dig our way out from under them. And we have to do it in a way that before we do irreparable damage potentially to the system in which we live. So I don't think we're on too far off as a society in understanding that those are issues we have to deal with. The only, my basic question or my basic philosophy anymore is, if you go back and look 5 years ago, 10 years ago, peak oil was the big question in the energy sector. And basically peak oil in a generic sense, when are we going to get to the point where fossil fuels in general are going to start a downward trend because there just aren't enough? I don't even think that's a question anymore. I think we now know there's enough fossil fuel out there in terms of the quantity we can use for quite a while. The question is how much can we afford to use in a sustainable manner without doing irreparable damage to the system in which we live? And I think that's a question that has not yet reached general consensus. I think, but underneath it, and I think at conferences like this or symposia like this, we want to look forward, and I think that's the real question that we have to come to at some point in time. The only question that we see, the only answer that I see in the short term to actually reducing the carbon footprint is to do something with CCS or long-term storage. That is still a question that is, I think, in the research stage. We know a lot about it. We know it works in cases. We do not know how big it can be. We do not know how successful it can be. It scares a lot of people. I don't know another answer right now to dealing with that problem besides that. Is that green? No, I'm not sure it's green, but it's at least not quite as dark.
Well, when you pose the question as do you use policy or markets, our view would be you need both. You need clear policies that then unleash the markets. And I think the technologies are out there. Carbon priced right, it will incentivize a lot of things happening. Carbon not being priced properly, stalls technology development and commercialization. And that's why both GE and Dow were part of U.S. CAP, and we were pushing for cap and trade, which ultimately failed last year in the U.S. Congress. But I believe that there are technology solutions. I think we have to focus on making coal more sustainable. If you look at the coal reserves of China, they're going to be used for a long time. So actually making that more sustainable is probably worth thinking about as a world because it's an important energy source for China for a good long time. But I think we need more policy clarity, but then you want to unleash markets to actually get you the technologies commercialized.
I agree that we absolutely need both. With respect to policy, I'd like to add that what we need the most is consistent policy. The U.S. as a country has done a poor job, for instance, in having any kind of consistent energy policy. Take the example of transportation. We've had the fuel du jour phenomenon. Maybe 20 years ago it was methanol, and then it was electricity, and after that it was ethanol, and after that it was hydrogen, and now we're back to electricity, and who knows? You really can't innovate or justify the investments right now. It's going to drive I think the American auto industry again to bankruptcy if we don't stand up quickly and say this is going to be, the policy. We cannot just outlaw hydrogen that was, in vogue 3 or 4 years ago. We need to really be thinking about sustainable future in a different way.
Yeah, I think I agree. Both are necessary. I think when we look into this greenhouse gas emission issue, I think these two countries are not in a very helpful type of interaction. As the two largest greenhouse gas emitters, we use each other as excuse not to really take actions on that. So globally, it's pretty negative. So what should be our starting point? I think one of the starting point could be our trade policy, our trade relationship. China, someone challenged David this morning about the greenhouse gas emission data. I think through calculation, I think it was found up to a quarter or to 30% of China's greenhouse gas emission are actually for manufacturing, for export. So I think while people are enjoying the cheap products here in this part of the world, they are actually tapping into the pretty polluting industries back in China. Half of the world's cement, chemical fiber, and even iron steel are now about made in China. And we look into those factories, the efficiency is low and the discharge is quite amazing. There are solutions there, but there's lack of motivation to deal with that. I think if we all care about this, one of the issues that we can work together is try to see whether through sustainable grain sort of supply chain program, we can actually, generate some motivation from this part of the world and promote the local companies in China to try to green up. I think there is a big opportunity there, but it hasn't been materialized.
Thank you. Let's thank our panel.